heart monitor spiked sharply, then dipped. Its warning beep cutting through the
Paging surgery.
Christmas
Room
carols
302.
playing faintly
Watch the
down
gurney
the
coming through.
hospital
We need a crash cart
corridor.
in trauma 3.
A child's breath came fast and uneven, small hands shaking under fluorescent lights that felt far too bright for Christmas Eve. Nurses rushed past, voices urgent, while somewhere outside the window, snow kept falling as if nothing in the world was wrong. Standing just outside the room was a man who wasn't a doctor, wasn't family, and technically wasn't supposed to be there at all. Yet he didn't move when someone told him to step aside. He stayed because leaving felt worse than breaking the rules. This was not how he imagined Christmas would look. He was a single father, working the night shift in an old public hospital, counting hours instead of blessings, carrying exhaustion the way other people carried hope. Christmas had stopped being magical years ago, replaced by survival, bills, and the quiet responsibility of raising a child alone. While others hurried home to dinners and laughter, he pulled on his uniform and prepared for another long night surrounded by strangers' pain. His own son was asleep in a small break room nearby, curled up beneath a borrowed blanket, trusting his father to come back when the night was over. The hospital was dressed in tired decorations, plastic wreaths, flickering lights, a tree missing half its ornaments, trying too hard to feel joyful. To him, it all felt like a performance that no one truly believed in. He had learned not to expect miracles, especially not on nights like this. But Christmas has a strange way of choosing its moments, often arriving quietly, unannounced, and through people who don't think they have anything left to give. And before this night was over, a single choice to stay instead of walk away would change how he understood fatherhood, loss, and what it truly meant to come home. He had learned how to survive the night by breaking it into hours. Midnight, 1 a.m. 2. Each hour meant he was closer to morning, closer to the moment he could take off his uniform and pretend for a few minutes that he was just a father and not a man constantly bracing himself for the next responsibility. Christmas Eve was no different, except it felt heavier, like the night itself expected something from him that he no longer knew how to give. The hospital hallway smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. Decorations hung where someone had taped them weeks ago, faded red bows, paper snowflakes curling at the edges, a plastic wreath missing half its pine needles. None of it felt festive. It felt tired, like the people who worked here, like him. He wasn't always like this. There was a time when Christmas meant staying up too late, laughing too loudly, wrapping gifts with uneven tape because perfection didn't matter. There was a time when he believed that love could protect you from losing things. Then life corrected him. His wife had died 3 years earlier. No dramatic speech, no time to prepare. One moment she was there, the next she was a memory he carried like unfinished business. Grief didn't arrive all at once. It settled slowly, reshaping him. He became quieter, smaller, not broken, but emptied. What remained was responsibility. Their son Ethan was 8 now, too young to understand why his father sometimes stared at nothing, too old not to notice that something had changed. Ethan had learned to tiptoe around his dad's sadness, to ask fewer questions, to accept maybe later as an answer that often meant never. And that knowledge, seeing his son grow careful, hurt more than exhaustion ever could. That night, Ethan was sleeping in the hospital break room, a couch that smelled like detergent and time, a thin blanket pulled up to his chin. He had insisted on coming with his father because Christmas should be together, and his dad hadn't had the strength to argue. He told himself it was temporary, just one night, just until morning. The man checked on him during every quiet moment, standing in the doorway, watching his son's chest rise and fall. That rhythm grounded him. As long as Ethan was breathing, he could keep going. His job didn't require miracles. He wasn't a doctor or a nurse. He handled logistics, patient transport, things that needed doing but didn't come with gratitude. He moved people from one place to another, like pieces on a board no one wanted to look at too closely. It suited him. Invisible work for an invisible man. Around him, other staff spoke about dinner plans, about gifts waiting at home. He nodded when spoken to, smiled when required. He didn't explain that Christmas had become a date on the calendar rather than a feeling. It was easier to let people assume. Shortly after midnight, a code was called in the pediatric wing. The tone changed immediately. Voices sharpened. Feet moved faster. The kind of urgency that cut through even the thickest fatigue. He was assigned to assist with crowd control and transport, routine, impersonal. He followed instructions without thinking. Thinking was dangerous. The room was bright, too bright. Machines hummed and beeped in a pattern that never allowed silence. In the middle of it all was a child. Small, fragile, not much older than Ethan. The child's eyes were wide, darting around the room, overwhelmed. There was fear there, but also something else. Confusion, deep and paralyzing. The adults around spoke quickly, over each other using words the child clearly wasn't processing. The noise only made it worse. The man noticed before anyone else did, maybe because he had learned to notice small things. The way the child flinched at sudden movements, the way their hands curled inward, protective, the way their breathing grew faster the more people tried to help. This wasn't just fear, this was overload. Someone told him to step back. He should have listened. He usually did. Rules were safe. Rules kept things simple, but his feet didn't move. Instead, he remembered another room, years ago, when Ethan had stopped speaking for weeks after his mother's death. How words had become useless, how silence had been louder than screams. Back then, he had learned a different language, not fluently, not perfectly, just enough to reach his son when nothing else worked. He lowered himself slowly, making sure the child could see him. He didn't touch, didn't speak. He waited, and in that moment, something shifted, not dramatically, not magically, just enough. He realized that Christmas hadn't ended for him because joy was gone. It had ended because he had convinced himself that his presence no longer mattered. That night, standing in a hospital room lit by cold lights instead of Christmas trees, he felt the fragile possibility that maybe he was wrong. The child's name was Lily. He learned that later. At first, she was just a small body surrounded by too much motion. Her grandmother stood near the wall, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked exhausted in a way that sleep could never fix. The kind of exhaustion that comes from loving someone fragile in a world that moves too fast. Lily didn't cry. That was what unsettled him the most. Children usually cried. Tears were expected, manageable. Lily did something else. She shut down. Her gaze fixed on the ceiling lights, blinking too slowly, as if her body had decided that stillness was the only way to survive. The machines were loud, the voices louder. Someone asked the grandmother questions she struggled to answer through shaking breaths. Lily didn't react to any of it. He saw it then. The same thing he had seen in Ethan years ago. When the world became unbearable, silence was not a choice. It was a shield. He raised his hands slowly, keeping them in Lily's line of sight. Simple movements, open palms, a gentle rhythm. He wasn't sure she knew sign language. That wasn't the point. The point was predictability, safety, control. Her eyes shifted, just slightly, but it was enough. A nurse frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, please step away. We need space." He nodded, but didn't leave. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was, not closer, not farther, present without pressure. He signed again, a small gesture meaning hello. Then he waited. Lily's fingers twitched. It could have been coincidence. It could have been nothing. But then her hand moved again, uncertain, imitating the shape he had made. The room seemed to pause, not because anyone noticed, but because something fragile was unfolding. a connection so quiet it could be missed entirely if you weren't looking for it. The grandmother noticed first. Her breath caught. She usually doesn't. Her voice broke. She stopped talking, afraid to interrupt whatever this was. Lily's breathing slowed. The machines didn't change, but the tension did. It softened, just enough. He signed something else. Safe, slow, reassuring. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to be heroic. He was remembering what it felt like to sit on the floor of his apartment at 3 a.m, signing, "I'm here," to a child who wouldn't meet his eyes. He was remembering how long it had taken, how patience had been the only thing that worked. Someone called his name sharply. "You're not authorized." He looked up. For a moment, the old instinct kicked in, the instinct to apologize, to retreat, to disappear. But Lily's hand reached out then, small fingers closing around the air between them, unfinished, searching. He stayed. The nurse sighed, torn between protocol and outcome. 2 minutes, she said, that's all. 2 minutes felt like permission and threat all at once. He signed Lily's name when he learned it. Her eyes widened again. Recognition sparked there. Being seen does that to people, even children who don't yet know how to ask for it. The grandmother wiped her face, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. "She doesn't trust easily," she whispered, "especially men." He nodded. He understood trust built from absence. The 2 minutes passed, then 5. No one stopped him. When Lily finally looked away from the lights and toward him fully, something inside his chest loosened. Not healed, just loosened. Enough to breathe. This wasn't his child. He knew that. But the feeling, the pull, the responsibility was familiar. It reminded him that fatherhood didn't disappear when life took something away. It changed shape. It asked different things. Outside the room, snow continued to fall. Somewhere in the hospital, a tired speaker played a distorted version of a Christmas song. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had thought Christmas was about what you lost when life broke you. That night he began to understand it might be about what you still carried, quietly, imperfectly, into rooms that needed it. And he stayed, not because it was his job, but because leaving would have meant abandoning a part of himself he had buried for too long. It didn't take long for tension to return. Hospitals never stayed calm for long. Even when a moment softened, reality always found a way back in, through rules, schedules, and people whose job was to make sure things didn't drift off script. The nurse who had given him 2 minutes came back, this time with a doctor trailing behind her. Their expressions weren't cruel, just firm. The kind of firmness that came from long shifts and limited patience. "We need to proceed," the doctor said, glancing between Lily and the machines. "Sir, thank you, but we'll take it from here." The man nodded slowly. He understood that tone. He had used it himself when Ethan asked questions he didn't have answers for. He lowered his hands, giving Lily a final sign, "Still here," before stepping back. But Lily reacted instantly. Her breathing hitched, her hands clenched. The fragile calm they had built shattered in seconds. Her grandmother gasped and reached for her, panic flashing across her face. The machines responded, alarms chirping in protest, as if the room itself had decided that calm was no longer allowed. "I think he was helping," the grandmother said, her voice trembling but firm. "Please." The doctor hesitated. The nurse looked conflicted. This was the space where systems struggled between policy and people, between efficiency and humanity. They weren't villains, they were tired professionals trying to keep order in a place that rarely rewarded softness. "We can't make exceptions," the nurse said quietly. "If we let everyone—" "I'll stay back," he said quickly. "I won't interfere. I can help her stay calm." Silence hung in the room. Lily's eyes searched for him again, desperate now. The look hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't fear anymore, it was trust, and the fear of losing it. The doctor exhaled. 5 minutes, he said, then we continue. 5 minutes felt like borrowed time. He moved slower now, careful not to overstep. He stayed near the wall, hands visible, movement small. Lily watched him like an anchor. Her breathing steadied again, though her grip on the bedsheet remained tight. Outside the room, a supervisor watched through the glass, arms crossed, not impressed. "Why is he in there?" the supervisor asked the nurse. "He's calming the child." "That's not his role." The nurse didn't answer. She just looked back at Lily, at the numbers stabilizing on the monitor. Sometimes outcomes spoke louder than explanations. The man felt the weight of eyes on him. He was used to that kind of scrutiny, the kind that questioned your right to exist in certain spaces. A single father, a night shift worker, someone without authority or credentials beyond lived experience. He wondered briefly if staying was selfish, if he was projecting his own history onto a child who wasn't his responsibility. But then Lily signed something clumsy and imperfect, her small fingers forming a word that wasn't quite right. Stay. That settled it. He stayed. Minutes passed, then more. The procedure continued, slower than planned but smoother than expected. Lily didn't shut down again. She flinched, yes. She whimpered once, but she stayed present. The grandmother sat down heavily, relief washing over her face. "Thank you," she mouthed. He nodded, unsure what to do with gratitude. Gratitude made things complicated. Eventually, the doctor nodded once. "All right," he said. "You can step out now." This time, Lily didn't panic when he moved away. She watched him go, but she didn't fall apart. That was the difference. She had learned something in those minutes, that she could survive this room. As he stepped into the hallway, the supervisor approached immediately. "You can't do that again," she said. "This isn't a daycare. You're not trained for this." He opened his mouth to apologize. The word was already there, automatic. But then he thought of Ethan, of how often apologies had been demanded from him just for trying to do right by his son. "I understand," he said instead, "but she needed someone." The supervisor looked at him for a long moment. "Next time," she said, "call a specialist." There wouldn't be a next time. He knew that. People like him were rarely invited back into moments like these. As he walked away, he felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Not pride, not anger, something quieter. Purpose. For years, he had believed that surviving was enough, that showing up, paying bills, keeping his child fed and safe was the full measure of his worth. That night challenged that belief. He checked on Ethan again. His son had rolled onto his side, hugging the blanket like it was something precious. The man brushed a hand through his hair, careful not to wake him. "I stayed," he whispered, though Ethan couldn't hear. "I stayed when it mattered." And for the first time in a long time, that felt like something worth carrying. The rest of the hospital moved on quickly. New patients arrived, old ones were transferred, paperwork stacked up. The night pressed forward without ceremony. But for him, something had shifted, and it made everything feel sharper. He was restocking supplies when the nurse from earlier approached him. Her voice was softer now, less guarded. "She's asking for you," she said. His first instinct was disbelief. "Me?" "She doesn't want anyone else near her right now," the nurse replied. "Just, if you have a moment." He looked at the clock. Technically, he didn't. His break had ended. There were forms to file, beds to move. Responsibility waited patiently, as it always did. But then he thought about the word Lily had signed. Stay. He nodded. This time they met in a quieter room. The lights were dimmed. Lily sat upright, a small blanket around her shoulders. Her grandmother squeezed his hand when he entered, eyes shining with something like hope. "You made a difference," she said simply. He sat across from Lily, not too close. He signed slowly, carefully. "How do you feel?" Lily considered, then signed back with effort. "Better." It wasn't perfect. Her hands stumbled. His weren't fluent. But understanding lived in the space between them, imperfect and real. They didn't talk about illness or fear. They talked about small things. Snow. A stuffed rabbit Lily had at home. A Christmas tree she liked because it had blue lights instead of white. Outside the room, the nurse watched, conflicted again. She wanted to step in, to keep boundaries intact, but she also saw the calm in Lily's posture, the absence of panic. Sometimes the right thing didn't fit neatly into procedure. Minutes turned into longer minutes. Then the supervisor returned. "This can't continue," she said firmly. "You're crossing lines." The grandmother stood. "Please," she said, "just a little longer." The supervisor shook her head. "We all have limits." That was the moment, the one that mattered. He could leave. He could nod, apologize, disappear back into the background where expectations were low and rules were clear. No one would blame him. He had already done more than required. But then Lily looked at him, not afraid, not desperate, just asking. He realized something then. Staying wasn't about Lily anymore. It was about the kind of father he wanted to be, not just to Ethan, but to himself. "I'll go," he said gently, "but let me say goodbye." The supervisor hesitated, then nodded once. He knelt in front of Lily and signed carefully. "I have to go now, but you are safe." Lily frowned, then signed something slowly. "You came back." The words hit him harder than any accusation ever had. "Yes," he signed, "I did." When he left the room, he felt the familiar weight of consequence settle on his shoulders. He didn't know if he'd be reprimanded. He didn't know if he'd crossed an invisible line that would cost him later. But he also knew this: if he hadn't stayed, he would have carried that absence forever. He returned to the break room to check on Ethan. His son was awake now, rubbing his eyes. "Dad?" Ethan whispered. "I'm here," he replied immediately, sitting beside him. Ethan smiled sleepily. "Merry Christmas." The words felt fragile, earned. "Merry Christmas," he said back. Outside, the hospital lights glowed against the falling snow. Inside, something new settled into place. Not joy, not yet, but a quiet certainty that sometimes staying costs you something, and sometimes it gives you back more than you knew you'd lost. Morning arrived without ceremony, the way it always did after a night that demanded more than it promised. The sky outside the hospital windows shifted slowly, from deep blue to a dull gray, as if the world itself was reluctant to wake. Snow still drifted down, lighter now, covering footprints from the night before, erasing evidence of urgency and fear. He felt it in his body before he could name it, a difference, subtle but undeniable. The night had left its mark on him. Lily was stable by dawn, not healed, not finished with her journey, but resting, truly resting. Her breathing was even, her hands no longer clenched in defense. The machines beside her hummed quietly, no longer demanding attention. Her grandmother sat in a chair pulled close to the bed, her posture softer, the tension that had carved itself into her shoulders finally easing. When the man passed by the doorway, the grandmother stood. She didn't speak at first. She simply placed a hand over her heart and nodded, her eyes shining with the kind of gratitude that felt too heavy for words. He returned the nod, unsure how to carry something so pure without feeling unworthy of it. He had done nothing extraordinary. That was what he told himself. He had stayed, that was all. The supervisor never formally reprimanded him. She passed him once in the corridor, slowed, then said quietly, "Be careful who you become indispensable to." It wasn't a warning so much as an acknowledgement. In places like hospitals, lines were drawn, not because people were cruel, but because caring too much came at a cost. He went back to work, finishing his shift in the same way he always did, moving beds, restocking supplies, signing forms. Yet every task felt different now, as if his hands remembered something his mind had forgotten for years. He noticed people more. The way a nurse rubbed her temples between rooms, the way a janitor paused to straighten a fallen decoration. Small acts of staying. Ethan woke near the end of the shift, hair sticking up, eyes still heavy with sleep. He followed his father through the hallways, dragging his feet, holding onto the edge of the man's jacket like a lifeline. Staff smiled at him, wished him Merry Christmas. He smiled back, shy but proud, as if he belonged there. "Dad," Ethan said quietly as they paused near the exit doors, "were you scared last night?" The question caught him off guard. He thought for a moment before answering. "Yes," he said honestly. Ethan nodded, absorbing that. "You stayed anyway." "Yes." "That's brave," Ethan said, as if stating a fact. The words settled deep in his chest. Outside, the cold air bit at their faces. The city looked different under fresh snow. Muted, slower, forgiving. Traffic crawled. People moved carefully, helping each other when someone slipped. For once, he didn't rush. He didn't calculate what he owed the day. They walked home together. Later, after Ethan fell asleep in his own bed, surrounded by familiar walls and quiet, the man sat alone by the window. The small Christmas tree in the corner glowed softly, decorated only with paper ornaments Ethan had made at school. They were crooked and uneven and perfect. He thought about Lily again, about the way her eyes had searched for him, about the trust she had offered without knowing his name, his history, his failures, about the words she had signed. Stay. He realized then that he hadn't lost Christmas because life had taken something from him. He had lost it because he had stopped believing he was allowed to receive it. Grief had convinced him that joy was something reckless, something that invited loss. But staying had reminded him that love wasn't a guarantee against pain. It was a commitment to presence. And that was something he could choose. The call came just as the evening lights flickered on. He almost didn't answer. Unknown number. His thumb hovered over the screen while the phone vibrated in his hand. Life had taught him that unexpected calls rarely brought comfort. Still, something, intuition maybe, pushed him to accept. It was the nurse from the pediatric wing. "She's awake," she said, "and she keeps asking for you." His chest tightened. She's okay," the nurse replied. "Stable, calm. She trusts you." He didn't ask how the nurse had gotten his number. Some questions didn't need answers. He grabbed his coat and headed back into the cold, snow crunching beneath his boots. The hospital felt transformed when he returned. Quieter, softer. The frantic energy of the night before had settled into something gentler. Decorations looked less tired now, as if the building itself had exhaled. Lily sat upright in bed when he entered the room, a small stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Color had returned to her cheeks. When she saw him, her face lit up, not with fragile relief, but with certainty. "You came back?" she signed carefully. "Yes," he replied, hands slow but steady. "I promised." Her grandmother turned away, wiping tears from her face. "She said Christmas felt safe," she whispered, "because you stayed." They didn't talk long. They didn't need to. Lily handed him the rabbit for a moment, then took it back, smiling as if sharing something precious without losing it. It was a goodbye and a thank you wrapped into one. When he left the room, he felt lighter than he had in years. The walk home felt different. The snow seemed brighter, the city quieter. At home, Ethan was waiting, sitting cross-legged by the tree. "Did you help her again?" he asked. "Yes," his father said. Ethan leaned against him. "Then this Christmas counts." The simplicity of it undid him. He wrapped an arm around his son and looked at the small room. The worn furniture, the quiet, the glow of lights, nothing about it was impressive. Everything about it was real. Christmas had not arrived with miracles or grand gestures. It had arrived quietly in a hallway, in a choice, in the courage to stay when walking away would have been easier. And as snow continued to fall outside, a single father and his son sat together, understanding something new. Christmas wasn't something you waited for, it was something you chose. In the end, nothing about his life became suddenly easier or more perfect after that Christmas. The hospital remained busy, the nights long, and the responsibilities of single parenthood as heavy as ever. But something essential had shifted inside him, something quiet and irreversible. He no longer saw himself as a man merely enduring life for his child, but as someone capable of shaping moments that mattered. Christmas, he realized, was not defined by warmth, decorations, or miracles that erase pain. It was defined by presence, by choosing to remain when fear, rules, or exhaustion offered every excuse to leave. The memory of a child's steadying breath and trusting eyes stayed with him, reminding him that kindness did not need permission to be real. For his son, it became a story of courage told without drama. For himself, it became proof that love was not found in grand gestures, but in quiet decisions repeated over time. And as the seasons moved forward, he carried one simple truth with him. Sometimes the most powerful gift you can give is not fixing what is broken, but staying long enough for healing to begin.